and the message that needs to be, the moral that needs to be told around the state over and over again, because we have to keep telling it because people forget it. And that is when an organization arises, a grassroots organization arises, they're kind of a single purpose, and then they spread out as they accomplish one thing. They start saying, gosh, it's possible to do something. So they spread their agenda. They begin to get experts. They meet chemists, they meet PhDs, they meet planners, they meet lawyers like me and like Fitz and like John. And they think, oh, good, we've got the experts here. We've got the legal advisors here. These people have a track record. We can sit back, because it's a royal pain in the butt to do this work. It takes time. You don't get paid for it. It takes away from other things you want to do. You get defeated more than you win. It's discouraging. It's hard work, but it's worth doing. And if you stick with it long enough, you win, and you start winning more. So the moral is, and this goes to lawyers and experts and whoever watches this recording in the future, if a grassroots group has come together, don't take over the grassroots group. Don't let them give you their group. Make them own their group. Make them direct their group, make them make the calls, make them stand up and do the talks. If you're a lawyer, advise them, give them your opinion. Don't take over every time, every chance there is to speak. It's just so important when you have a PhD in the room to ask politely and respectfully, what's the basis for what you just said? You've said something. It's very important. It either, if they're paid by industry, they're saying X. If they're retained by somebody you agree with, they're an echo chamber for you. But drill down and ask them, why did you say that? What's the basis? So that's the moral of the story. The story is this. Late 2014, Chris was already involved with her group in fighting with the group, what's called the Bluegrass Pipeline. And in a nutshell, the Bluegrass Pipeline was an effort to take byproducts, waste products from fracking fields in Pennsylvania down to Louisiana and Texas. And these are called NGLs, natural gas liquids, and they're hazardous waste. And take them down to Louisiana and Texas and put them on ships and take them to Asia and turn them into low-grade plastic and ship the plastic back to America. In a nutshell, that's what this was all about. And there was a lot of money at stake because fracking was making a lot of money. It was making a lot of waste. And these hazardous liquid gases, the natural gas liquids, were, some people report, people who know a lot more than me about chemistry, that they're 150 times more explosive than natural gas. I've been around 2 natural gas explosions, one in Lincoln County near Danville where we live, and one in Garrett County, very close to where we live. Both of them were hugely impactful, hugely destructive explosions. 150 times that would have been literally unimaginable. And these natural gas liquids also are heavier than ambient air. When there's a rupture in a pipeline, part of them becomes gaseous, part of them remains liquid. The liquid part has known carcinogens, infiltrates drinking water and aquifers. The gaseous part is heavier than ambient air. Therefore, it's forced down into low-lying pockets. It can be ignited by a cell phone, a cigarette, any number of ignition sources, and you have an explosion 150 times greater than natural gas. That was the problem. Chris's group did an excellent job of working with Fitz and others, a great collaboration of stopping the Bluegrass Pipeline. that company claimed they had the right of eminent domain, which is traditionally, when I was in law school, reserved for governmental entities and has been expanded to corporate interests over time because there's, in my cynical view, because there's so much money at stake and elected officials set the rules, that's why there was expansion in the eminent domain rule of law. But it's being curtailed again a little bit. In a nutshell, since Chris's group stopped the Bluegrass pipeline, then a group called Kinder Morgan, which is the largest pipeline company in North America, put $5 billion behind a project to take the fracking waste down to Texas, Louisiana, put it on ships and sell it to Asia and reprocess it into cheap plastic. They were going to, the shortest route would have been to go to the East Coast, but they chose to come down through Ohio, Kentucky, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas for their route. Eventually, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but this was a high point in our struggle. Eventually, they wanted to meet with us. So they sent their project engineer, who was also the project manager, their HR person, and their local counsel from Frankfurt. We met with them. The project manager could not have been more respectful or polite at the end of the session, and he was forthcoming also. It was very refreshing. But at the end of the session, he said, "We came this way because we did not anticipate much resistance. It was further to travel over land, but it would be through a population which is known for being polite, respectful, and, with all due respect, undereducated. Rather than go through the Philadelphia corridor and that route where they knew they would have unbelievable citizen grassroots organization against them, they decided they could come through us." Well, the pipeline they were going to use was built in World War II. And it was built to take natural gas from Texas, Louisiana, up to Pennsylvania to help with energy needs during World War II. All the welds on that pipeline were during World War II. All of the construction techniques were World War II. Stones were not segregated from the pipeline before the pipeline was backfilled. Pipelines vibrate. Stones that hit vibrating metal create weak spots in the metal. These pipelines, we were convinced after talking to metallurgists and pipeline engineers and chemists, were not safe. The welds weren't safe, the metal wasn't safe. So a grassroots organization, primarily based in Danville, grew up, and it was led by two women in their 70s who had never led a grassroots organization. And it was their group, their cronies, their peers, and a group of young people. And it was a great collection. And from day one, when they asked me if I would be involved, and I was honored to be involved for a variety of reasons, then I said, first thing we need to do is get FITS involved and get KRC involved. And that was probably the most important contribution I made. And secondly, I said, don't let me take over, don't let FITS take over. And that was the second most important thing I said. Other than those two things, my contribution was minimal. But I was a witness, so I can tell you the rest of the story. We got this group started gathering information, and it wasn't me and it wasn't FITS, it was the group. And you would be astounded at how tech savvy, despite all the media about boomers can't do this and can't do that, you would be astounded at how tech savvy and educated they are. Center College is in our community. We have a regional medical center. It is a very alert, awake community in terms of capabilities, and the senior citizens here did a great job of formulating questions and not resting until they had some answers. and you couldn't BS them. And these two women would stand up and politely not sit down when they heard BS and non-answers and people talking over them and talking down to them, and they kept standing. A good example of that is that after we got resolutions, unanimous resolutions, bipartisan from Republicans and Democrats alike, from our city commission, our fiscal court, which is very conservative, our industrial foundation, which is very conservative, our Chamber of Commerce, which is very conservative, our Heart of Danville, our Main Street Project, our Convention Visitors Bureau, Junction City Commission, Perryville City Commission, and so on and so forth. We went through and we didn't fall upon, hey, these people have traditionally not held the same values that this group holds. This pipeline runs right next to Hogsett Elementary. It's literally the footprint. It was within 150 feet of an elementary school in our downtown. It went straight through our downtown area, it went near our hospital, it crossed over Lake Harrington, suspended in the air, and it posed a huge threat. And people, I was surprised, we found a welcome response from people who had never even been able to sit at the table before, and it was unanimous. Every one of these groups unanimously passed resolutions. So where did all that put us? We had a tremendous show of support. We'd met with the company, and the company had said, we didn't expect any opposition, and we're getting opposition, so we want to meet with you. And that meeting ended with their project manager saying, well, I'd do the same thing you're doing if I were you. And that was shocking, but it's true. And we kept fighting. They wanted to try to find common ground. They offered, they would send sonar pigs through the pipeline to test welds and so on and so forth. We said, that's not good enough. We don't trust your data anymore. We are going to fight you. We appreciate the respectful meeting. But after all, we got all these public shows of support, and we had the press involved. We kept the press involved and gave them information. We didn't lobby them, but we gave them information, wrote the copy for them, and then it made it easy for them to cover the stories. And it wasn't, again, it wasn't Fitz, it wasn't me doing this. It was the grassroots organization doing it. There was plenty of work, plenty of phone calls, plenty of things to be written, plenty of things to research to keep the grassroots organization engaged and making the decisions, and the lawyers advising and offering options, but working at the direction of the grassroots organization as long as they can do so. And in our code of professional ethics, we're taught to do so zealously within the bounds of the law. And as long as it was not unethical, double negative intended, and as long as it was aiming in the right direction towards an effective conclusion, then we had them driving the ship, and that's the way it should be. So one of the brilliant ideas that Fitz came up with was to, you were just talking about planning and zoning, was to go to planning and zoning and use something called the Board of Adjustments and make this group get what's called a conditional use permit. And normally conditional use permits are granted by the Board of Adjustments when somebody wants to do a land use activity in a community that is different than the comprehensive plan and different than the master plan. Like a barn wedding venue in an agricultural area that's going to bring in a bunch of traffic. That's a conditional use permit, or a dog kennel in a neighborhood or something like that. Well, Fitz said, well, the test for conditional use permits is it compatible with existing land uses? So is a natural gas, hazardous liquids, natural gas liquids, hazardous liquids pipeline next to an elementary school compatible with teaching our children and making them safe at school? No. So why don't we make them get a conditional use permit? There was no federal law that was regulating them. There was a group called FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and I don't have time to get into all that they do and don't do. And the state agencies, they didn't have any regulatory authority over these hazardous liquids. So nobody did. So it was down to the local regulatory agencies, and planning and zoning literally had a cow when we proposed that they regulate this. But Fitz wrote a model ordinance, and we were going to take it to planning and zoning. I had to be in court and couldn't be there. Fitz wasn't there, and Sarah Volkamp, one of the leaders of the grassroots organization, was there. And you'll love this, the planning and zoning board chair said, off agenda, turns to Sarah and says, we've heard that you all want to do an ordinance about this pipeline, and we can't do that. We asked our lawyer, and we can't do that under what's called the federal law of preemption. And then he turned to the attorney and said, please explain why we can't do this. And the lawyer said, well, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has authority over this pipeline, and therefore the field is preempted by federal law, and we can't do it. And the Public Service Commission at the state level has authority, so they preempt, so we can't do it. And Sarah stood up off without being recognized and said, well, we talked to Fitz and we talked to Mark Morgan, and they said you could, and they're not here. They didn't know this was going to come up, and they're in court. So you got to defer this till you got to table this till the next meeting. And the chair said, you're wrong, to Sarah politely, but you got to sit down, and you're wrong, and we've got a full agenda, and we've got to move on. And she said, well, I'm not sitting down, and I'm going to be polite too, but I'm not sitting down, and I'm not being quiet until this is passed, until you hear all sides. And after a few awkward moments, the chair tabled it until the next meeting, when other commission members said, you got to wait. So that's the power of a grassroots organization. That's the moral of the story. So at the next meeting, we had a memo, and I was able to present the memo, and the attorney said, you know, you're right. FERC doesn't have authority, and PSC doesn't have authority, so we can do this. And to his credit, he changed his tune. And at the end of the year, well, we passed the ordinance, the conditional use permit ordinance. And at the end of the year, when the Planning and Zoning Commission chair was giving his wrap up to the fiscal court and to the city commission, he said that their main accomplishment that year was passing that ordinance, to his credit. And that is, if you think Sarah was comfortable when she stood up with everybody in the room wanting to get down the agenda, and she stood there and wouldn't sit down, I guarantee you she was uncomfortable. And she was in her late 70s, and she did that. She didn't hold elected office, and she did that because she was absolutely right. So that's the takeaway. That's the moral. I have a lot of other remarks, and I'm going to punt on those because I think we've made the point. And there, if you get in the middle of one of these struggles, you get so caught up in it, and they're so important, and there's so many people who deserve recognition that don't get recognized and haven't today. And you want to tell everybody's story, and you want to, because it's also important to you. And this went on for over 5 years of a lot of time. But the main thing is, if you've got a good grassroots organization, nurture it, keep it busy, make it do the work, and let it lead. Thank you.